Hi there, and welcome to this introductory episode of a 5-part series that gives you a glimpse into the Canadian youth criminal justice system through the use of a real youth justice case from Newfoundland and Labrador. The objective of this series is to leave you with a greater understanding of how cases are dealt with in the youth justice system in relation to the Youth Criminal Justice Act, as well as a basic understanding of just one of the many criminological theories that help guide researchers and academics, who in turn are instrumental in assisting governments and other relevant institutions with informed, scientific guidance to develop and implement policies, regulations, and legislation around youth crime and justice. My name is Ben Durnford, and I'm the host of this series entitled Gazebo Unique. I know that most of you are likely anxious to hear about this real youth justice case from Newfoundland and Labrador. However, given that this podcast has been developed with research and academia in mind, rather than sensationalistic reporting often exhibited by the news media, especially around youth justice issues, I think it's prudent that I first set you up with a criminological lens with which we can later apply to the case that I describe. This will also allow us to engage in a critical discourse around our chosen case and the contextual topics. The information I provide you here has been taken from two sources. The first being a book entitled Youth Justice, A Canadian Overview, written by John Winterdick, Kelly Gorkoff, Daniel Antanowick, and Russell Smandage. The second source is from the Encyclopedia of Criminological Theory and is written by Gary Sweet. So let's learn a bit about the age-graded theory of social control. The age-graded theory of social control is a theory created by Sampson and Lobb in 1993. And it centers on the concept of informal social control, as well as the continuity of behavior by an individual as they move from childhood to adulthood and beyond. Additionally, experiences and events that alter these behaviors are also given focus. The overall emphasis is on how informal social controls at different stages of a person's life influence continuity and change in offending behavior. The theory first identifies 3 informal social control mechanisms within the familial context of adolescence: attachment, monitoring, and consistent discipline. The theory suggests that those without strong emotional bonds, direct supervision of behavior, and dependable discipline will be more likely to engage in crime. The theory identifies school as an additional source of socialization. Here, the degree of attachment to the people within the institution, as well as academic performance, can influence participation in delinquency. The theory argues that social structural factors influence the quality and levels of these social bonds, whether or not they're from home or school. Socioeconomic status, unemployment, family dissolution, and residential mobility can all undermine these bonds. Social bonds can also be undermined by individual differences in criminal propensity. A child's antisocial characteristics can also lead to a rejection by conventional peers, destroying another source for positive socialization. This makes those with negative traits more likely to move into groups of youths displaying similar types of antisocial characteristics, again, increasing the likelihood of offending. While the primary concern for this podcast is youth, it's important to include that the age-graded theory of social control, as the name suggests, is applicable through the course of a lifetime. Also keep in mind that not one single criminological theory will explain all offending. More often than not, researchers and academics would agree that any given situation is more likely situated within a Venn diagram of many theories and explanations, each of which have some stake in explaining offending behavior. In September 2018, in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, a 14-year-old boy, along with some peers, lured a 12-year-old girl to an abandoned building. It was here that he and other youth beat, kicked, and held a knife to the young girl's throat and chest. The 14-year-old boy choked the girl until she lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness, a peer of his, a 14-year-old girl, also began to choke their 12-year-old victim. She escaped, but they caught her and forced her into a cooler as the 14-year-old girl pressed a knife against the victim's chest. She was only released from the cooler when she began to cry as a result of being trapped inside. You'd think this assault would be near over, but no. The girl was then forced into a corner where she had kitty litter thrown over her. The the 14-year-old female assailant approached the girl from behind, holding a knife to her back and telling her that the abandoned building was a good place to kill somebody and that her body would not be found. She was then forced to her knees and kicked in the stomach. On their way back to school, the 14-year-old male assailant told the girl that if she told anybody about the attack, he would kill her. He was arrested the next day. What led these youths to commit such a horrific crime? Why did the Honorable Judge Wayne Gorman give the 14-year-old boy a sentence of 10 months in secure custody, plus 2 years of probation, when both the Crown and Defence recommended a 6-month open custody and supervision order with probation? Why did his female counterpart receive a sentence of 2 years probation for her participation in the crime? These questions can be addressed in the context of the Youth Criminal Justice Act and the governing principles set out in it. Though multiple assailants were involved in this case, the rest of this series will lend its focus to the 14-year-old boy and how we can view his situation from the lens of our chosen criminological theory. I will also contrast how the 14-year-old boy and the 14-year-old girl's cases differed when they appeared before the court. Some issues that we will consider in these contexts include his troubled life. He has partial fetal alcohol syndrome, was removed from the familial home before he was 1 because of his parents' inattention and drug use, and was placed with the grandmother, who admits she had very little control over the boy. In grade 7, the boy had 125 behavioral incidents, while in grade 8 he had 66, though he was only in school for an hour a day. Psychological reports state that the boy had been involved in more fights and beatings than he can remember, and that he had been stabbed and had stabbed others. They said that he had shown little empathy for the victim or remorse for his actions. The pre-sentence report indicates that the boy will likely continue his pattern of offending if not given secure custody, which would enable stakeholders to initiate rehabilitative programming. Finally, the psychiatric report concluded that the assault was pre-planned, well calculated, and was not impulsive, as would, for example, be sometimes the case in individuals with ADHD. As we can see, there are many considerations which we explore throughout the course of this series. I hope I've been able to interest you in the exciting world of youth justice. To conclude this introductory episode, I want to inform my listeners of some self-imposed guidelines that I will be following during the course of this series. As I've said previously, this podcast is intended to present you with a knowledge from a research and academia standpoint. Thus, considerations will be in that context. It is important to distinguish the difference between this method of approach and that of a reporter. From an academic standpoint, it's of vital importance for me to present facts of this case in a way that does not skew the audience's perception of the issues. We are not seeking to pass judgment on the individuals as such. Rather, we seek to describe, predict, and explain criminological behavior using academic, peer-reviewed research, interviews, case law, current legislation, and by using a self-report survey that will be administered to youth in the Corner Brook area once approved by the Interdisciplinary Research Committee on Ethics in Human Research at Memorial University. It will be important throughout the series for me to maintain ethical and moral decision-making regarding any research, interviews, or material that I choose to include. It's also of utmost importance that I clearly explain to you, the listener, of these considerations. One such example is that my sources are clearly identified, and that personal opinion is separated from scientific theory and evidence. On episode 3 of this series, I will spend some time discussing and posing questions to Andrew Parsons, MHA for my area and former Justice Minister for Newfoundland and Labrador. I must remember to maintain a professional rapport with Mr. Parsons, to be diligent in asking my questions, and I will also need to be explicitly clear with him as to how I intend to use our conversation for this podcast. During my interview with him, I will attempt to guide the interview along using a scripted question set that hopefully will focus our discussion around research, academia, and the ways in which our justice institutions consult with and implement suggestions from researchers and academics as they relate to youth justice in Newfoundland and Labrador. This episode will also feature an interview from a former youth probation officer from my area. The same considerations will apply here as they do for Mr. Parsons. Finally, you may be wondering why I've not named the individuals in this case. In Canada, publication bans are often in place for parties involved in youth crime. That is the case here, and so another ethical concern for me is to follow the publication ban. This podcast is being produced in Port aux Basques, Newfoundland, a 2-hour drive from where the case took place and where court proceedings were held. Research aside, a personal goal of mine is to educate, promote, and encourage engagement with the criminal justice system generally and in Newfoundland and Labrador. It logically follows that I will use a real court case from the province, in addition to producing a podcast here, a place where I grew up, where I'm able to connect with my subject on a more direct level than if my chosen case were somewhere else in the country. Furthermore, my plan to interview Mr. Parsons, a former probation officer, and to conduct a self-report survey in the city of Corner Brook will be made much easier by my producing the podcast locally. Finally, any advertisements used in the production of this podcast series will be directed toward promoting the sharing of youth justice resources and services within the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm your host, Ben Durnford. I'll see you next time on Gazebo Unique.